This is North Pod, a North Melbourne fan podcast, hosted by Jason Hunt.
Stevenson with his own moves. Carrington. North are in front.
Hello and welcome back to North Pod after our round 23 loss to Richmond. Let's make that 20 losses in a row, a nice clean 20. I think it went about as well as I thought it might go, particularly after learning that LDU was going to be a laid out. I think that really crushed any hope that it was going to be a decent game for us. It seems like he was out with a foot injury, which is, a bit of a concern, but by the same token, we're nearly at the end of the year and we're at that point now where, look, if there's some injuries, so be it. It's the end of the year. Let's just make sure we don't have any long-term injuries happening now. They're going to impact us for the preseason and into the start of next year. Obviously, it was Ziebell's farewell game on the MCG. It was good to see he and Riewoldt and Cotchin sort of being featured before the game and whatnot. It wasn't anywhere close to a full strength unit for North Melbourne, unfortunately. Perez came in for LDU, which is certainly not a like for like. We had Blake Drury as the sub. There was plenty of other injuries that I'll talk about that meant that we're a fair way below 100%. But really, it was just all about the retiring players. It was essentially a dead rubber. Obviously, we've got nothing but pride to play for, and Richmond are out of the finals race. So I thought it was a pretty flat game. It started really flat, and really the only time there was any life in the game was when it was Riewoldt, Cotchin or Ziebell getting involved. Richmond in particular were really trying to get Riewoldt and Cotchin involved. Dustin Martin was essentially just looking for them at every opportunity that he could to hit them up. And similarly, like we tried to get Ziebell involved late for a goal. He took a good mark. So that was really just all about the retirees. And the match itself wasn't much of a spectacle. To be honest, was pretty disappointing game. It was kind of a classic North Melbourne game from this second part of the year where we looked like we're a chance and just some costly errors that I'll talk about in a minute took us out of the game. But what's new for us this year? We've lost 20 in a row, so we're used to it. Final score was Richmond 101 defeats North Melbourne 72, so a 29-point loss. And it was over sort of 5 minutes into that last quarter, really, when Richmond got a run on and kicked a few goals to kick away. Story of the game, and I cannot reiterate how massive a moment this was. I think most North Melbourne fans have already talked about it on Twitter or complained about it to their mates already. Daniel Howeler, we're going to have to start calling him. Daniel Howe, during the second quarter, made, I think, one of the most confusing mistakes I've ever seen on a football field. We're up by 2.5 goals. We're playing okay. We've got all the momentum. He gathers the ball inside our defensive 50. He's facing towards our goal. Instead of bombing it to a contest sort of, down the line or even in the middle of the ground, which is dangerous, we had some options there. They weren't free, but, we had players in those positions. He, for whatever reason, didn't do that, but he turned 90 degrees, and I would even say back towards the Richmond goal, and kicked a mongrel punt, towards the Richmond goal / the boundary line. Hit up Dustin Martin. He didn't mark it, but Dustin Martin was able to gather it and then got a pass through to Prestia, who kicked a goal. I honestly don't know what Daniel Howe was thinking. It was one of the most bizarre mistakes I've ever seen on a football field. Not because, I've seen worse mistakes, but the way it's just so hard to know what he was trying to do. Like, I don't know what he was trying to achieve with that. From that moment, Richmond kicked 6 unanswered goals, and we just never recovered. The momentum swung completely towards Richmond, and yeah, it was just an absolute backbreaker of a mistake. I do not know what he was trying to achieve. I do not know what he was thinking, and it just sums up what Daniel Howe's brought to the team this year. He knows how to find the football, but some of his mistakes are just so costly, and he's supposed to be, he's in that 26, 27 kind of age bracket where he's supposed to be leading this team, or at least, let me rephrase, people of his age profile are supposed to be leading this team. And yeah, that was such a massive mistake. He cannot play next week. I know that this would normally just be a negative, but that was the story of the game. From there on, Richmond led, and we were not able. It took us such a long time to stop their momentum, and we weren't able to get back into the game after what was such an innocuous, random, bizarre choice. So, yeah, I really like to be positive, and I don't like absolutely giving it to a player, but that broke me, that mistake yesterday. You just watched it and went, I honestly have no idea, how it could get worse than this for us. So yeah, just a shocking mistake, and really changed the momentum of the game. And we've just seen that so many times this year where we're playing okay and we make one or two big errors, and Bob's your uncle, we're 4 goals down. I think about the end of that second half against Melbourne, Jaden Stevenson should have handballed over the top for us to kick a goal. He went for it and we missed, and it went up the other end, and Melbourne kicked a goal, which, gave them some momentum going into half time. So yeah, that was a real flattening one by Daniel Howeler, and I can't give it any more oxygen. Let's move on to the 3 stars of the game. I've said North Melbourne's best player I thought was Taron Thomas. He didn't have too many mates today, but there were a couple of shining lights. Taron Thomas, 24 disposals, 4 marks, 4 tackles, 4 clearances, 2 goals, 9 inside 50s, 13 of his possessions were contested. When we were looking good today, it was him getting out of the middle or transitioning the ball and moving the ball, down the ground. I think he had about 700 metres gained. He could have potentially had a third goal if Drury hadn't have flicked Vlosten. There was a couple of really poor umpiring decisions today as well. Like Larkey got a free kick for getting pushed in the chest, which was extremely soft. And when Taron Thomas was lining up for a goal, Blake Drury and Vlosten were in a bit of what I would describe as a very soft push and shove, and they reversed it, and Taron Thomas lost the kick goal. So he could have had 3 if not for that. But yeah, particularly when we were going well, Taron Thomas was looking really good and just looked a class above the rest of our midfielders. He's that only one that can kind of burst away from a stoppage, can push his way through a contest or, through bodies and get a clean possession away. So it's a massive issue, I think, for our list management, because we know that, he's got a year left of his contract. There's been some rumours swirling based on his social media activity and whatnot around whether or not potentially he's going to ask for a trade. And yeah, I'm still really torn on him because we know that, personality-wise, maybe there's some issues, or I guess maturity-wise. But he's our classiest, most skillful player. Maybe LDU is the only one that's more important in terms of our midfield group. And yeah, he was really good, Taron Thomas. It's probably his best game, or close to his best game for the year. He's had several good ones, but he was really good. I thought For the second star, I've said Harry Sheezel. He had 37 disposals, 7 marks, 4 tackles, 2 clearances, 8 intercept possessions, and went at 87%. And similar to Thomas, out of the back line, he was our cleanest player, probably the only one who was consistently giving us that drive and effective disposal by hand and foot. There was a couple of chains where he picked up 3 or 4 in a row through handball receives and 1-2s, but he was driving the ball forward and just looked a class above. Probably more of a slight on the rest of the team, to be fair, because if you watch a good football side play, there'll be lots of players that have a similar class to a Sheezel and Thomas playing for those sides. We don't have that. We've got 5 or 6 that have that class, and then it really drops off a cliff, I think. But yeah, Sheezel was fantastic again, and he's the only player in that defense who I think is a one-touch good decision maker who can be effective consistently. Like we've seen Ziebell can do that at times this year. Obviously, we'll talk about him soon, but he's obviously retired. I think we're hoping that Goda and Bergman can become that, but neither of them are that at the moment. So, yeah, she's had a fantastic game again and really, really putting his case forward for that rising star. He's got one more match to potentially put more of a case forward. I thought, obviously, Nick Larkey with the 6 goals is pretty stiff to not get a star here, but yeah, I've only got 2 to give out, and I thought it's a bit of the old if Thomas and Sheezel aren't doing their grunt work, then Larkey can't have the impact that he did. And as I said, I think that Larkey probably only deserved 5, given 1 was an absolute soft nothing. So either way, 5 or 6 goals is a fantastic effort in the North Melbourne forward line. So Larkey unlucky. In terms of the best opposition player, has to go to Dustin Martin. I probably could have gone Shea Bolton too, but he had 31 disposals, 3 goals, 7 marks, 7 inside 50s, and if he wasn't spending half the game looking for Cotchin and Riewoldt and trying to get them involved, he probably would have done even more damage. He just killed us all day, too strong, too smart. And yeah, between him and Shea Bolton, it just showed the difference when you've got those players who can genuinely go through the middle and then genuinely go and be extremely dangerous and efficient in the forward line. It makes such a big difference. We don't really have those players. We have players that can play in the midfield, but when they go forward, they're not super dangerous, or can play through that forward line, but really can't be thrown to the middle. The only one that maybe fits that bill that's obviously not on the side at the moment is Zerha, but there's obviously also some issues with his fitness when he's going through the middle. So, yeah, both Bolton and Martin were fantastic. Martin, I thought, as I said, he was best on by a fair way for Richmond. And, yeah, I mean, obviously, it's no slight on the North Melbourne players that couldn't handle it. Like, poor Bailey Scott got out-muscled by Dusty in the goal square. And you go, well, fair enough. Like, he's so much stronger. He's more mature. Like, that's not a... I don't chastise Bailey Scott for that. He was stuck trying to, do the right thing for the team. But, yeah, Dusty put on a show today, and he was the difference maker, I thought. And as I said, if he wasn't trying to... There was several times where all he was doing was trying to kick it to Cotchin or Riewoldt. And it was actually kind of frustrating because as the North Melbourne... I don't know what the North Melbourne players were doing because all he was doing was looking to kick it to those options. So surely you're manning them up, Anyway, it was a frustrating game. I'm getting antsy just thinking about it again. So yeah, Dusty the best on for the Tigers, and certainly Thomas, Sheezel were best on, and potentially Larkey as well for us. Before I jump into the rest of the podcast, just a reminder to share me with any North Melbourne fans that you know. Help me get the word out there. There's going to be heaps of post-season content coming your way. We're nearly at the end, so we're certainly going to look at some season review and trade and draft, those kinds of things. So plenty coming up. Just a reminder to subscribe on your chosen podcast service. Leave me a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Helps other people to see the podcast. And you can follow me on all my social media accounts at North Pod Show. All right, let's get into the negatives. And I've already talked about the biggest one. So that Daniel Howe moment, that was the biggest negative of the match. I'm not going to go over it, but I just want to reiterate that was the biggest negative of the game. Of the game. He cannot play next week. Horrific. Let's move on from that. I thought Paul Curtis just needs some refinement over this off-season. He looked to be playing very high up the ground, and at times I actually thought he might have pushed into the midfield. He was playing that high up the ground, which is fine. But he was just so hot and cold today. He did some fantastic things. Probably, I'd say that his work led directly to a couple of goals, but he also just makes too many mistakes at the moment. There was a moment where he'd marked the ball maybe 35, 40 metres out. He saw an option. We had, I guess, a player in the goal square and a player that had gone short. He tried to hit, I think, the player in the goal square, but it fell short and went to a Richmond interceptor, when we essentially had either a set shot on goal or a throw on one. You can't afford to make mistakes like that. He then made up for it eventually, and that led to a lucky goal, 30 seconds later. But we've got to get to a point where he's not making those kinds of poor decisions or skill errors. There was another one where he, as I said, he played quite well at times. Like there was one where he didn't take possession, he just kept moving the ball forward, and that resulted in a goal. He was sort of batting it forward and keeping it alive. There's so much potential there. He's really strong. Obviously, he's young, but I just think next year he's going to be one of those players that we need to see it come together a bit more consistently if we're going to improve. I think it's, it's potentially a bit harsh. If he's playing in a better side, I think it'd be easier to give him a bit more rope, but we just have such a small margin for error in this side at the moment, and we need forwards who are opportunistic and grab those chances and score, like Larkey. Now, obviously, we're not going to have 6 Nick Larkeys in the forward line. He's a fantastic player, but we need players to be trending more towards him, where we get a one-on-one and we look at that opportunity and go, great, I think we're a better than 50% chance of scoring here. And I think at the moment, Paul Curtis is a less than 50% chance because of those errors that he's prone to. So just looking for more consistency from him. There's so much potential there. I think there's a few things that he could work on over the off-season to try and get better. I think the next player I'm going to talk about is in a very similar boat, and that's Will Phillips. I am a big Will Phil fan. I'm going to put that out there. I think I do worry about him as a long-term midfield option, just given his size, but I've been trying to think about, whilst a lot of the midfielders these days that are prominent are taller, like obviously we think of Bontempelli as, in the 190s, he's massive, but they're not all big. Like Lockie Neal is not a big midfielder, and he's obviously one of the best in the game. So it's not impossible, and I'm not saying that Will Phil is anything like Lockie Neal at this stage. All I mean to say is that you can be a smaller midfielder and still be a fantastic player. I was excited to get him back in. He had a bit of a dirty game against Richmond, turned it over at unfortunate times, had a couple of kicks where it was just clear that the chemistry between he and who he was kicking it to wasn't there, or he just missed the kick. There was a moment where he had to go back with the flight and take a mark, and he spilled the mark and it went up the other end for a Richmond score. Just too many mistakes. And I think, at least with Paul Curtis, he was dropped once, but Paul Curtis has pretty much been in the side for the majority of the year. Will Phil has been in and out, in and out, in and out, and I do wonder what that does to a player's confidence. Look, who knows where he's at and what the North coaching staff want from him, but it was not a good game for him, and I think similar to Paul Curtis, next year we're gonna need to see a few things come together. I'm prepared to give him a pass for a lot of stuff this year based on his really tricky year last year with glandular fever. Obviously, that ruins a lot of your match fitness, and he also had issues in that he's had COVID interrupted underage years. So look, I'm prepared to cut him some slack for that, but it wasn't a good game for him. He was pretty costly, and I'm going to talk about him in the next negative as well. He's just part of that midfield group that didn't look fantastic today. So the midfield in general just looked second rate, really, except for Taron Thomas. Obviously, Bailey Scott was fantastic again on the wing, but beyond those two, it was, Willfield, Daniel Howe spent a lot of time in the midfield. Darcy Tucker went through a little bit at times. We really missed LDU. We needed someone with the class for a Wardlaw or a Sheezel, and yep, we've been saying those kinds of things all year. At one point, we won a clearance, but Tucker, Willfield, and Howe just handballed it around, went backwards, gave it, put pressure on each other. And eventually, Will Phillips ended up turning it over by foot. It's just such a massive difference between what other sides are able to do when they get a clearance versus what we are able to do when we get first hands on it. We just don't seem to be able, unless it is Taron, to make use of first use of the ball. I didn't think any of the other midfielders that went through there really had a fantastic game. I thought Simpkin was okay, but he spent a lot of time out on the wing. It's just, so many so-so players going through that midfield when we're missing a couple. And that is supposed to be an area that we've got some depth in. I think we've got depth in that we've got lots of midfielders, but not enough of them are performing up to that level that we need them to. Tom Powell is one I was excited around him getting the opportunity to play, and I don't think that he grabbed it. I'm not sure what's going on with him at the moment. His VFL form hadn't been great either, but I was happy to get him back in, and he just hasn't seemed to be that player that he was in his first year. I'm not sure what's happened to his development. Hugh Greenwood came back in but pretty much played forward, so he had a couple of good moments but didn't really get to show his kind of midfield grunt class. So just too many so-so performances from the midfield, which leads me to that next negative, which is the rucks. And again, a pretty quiet game from both Goldie and Cherry. Goldie took a couple of marks early but was pretty much anonymous after that. And similarly, Cherry did a couple of good things in the ruck, had a couple of good hit-outs, a couple that went really straight down Thomas's throat and he was able to get a clearance. But I thought the Richmond rucks won out on the day, and in particular, those Richmond rucks punished us when they went forward. Like Nankervis kicked 1 goal 1, Soldo kicked 2 goals 3. He could have really done some damage, and they marked really well, which is something that we have lacked from our ruckmen all year, really. Cherry, I think, took 1 mark. Goldie would have taken 2 or 3. So better than last week, but not by much. Yeah, it's a big issue for us, these rucks. I'm not sold at all on playing 2 rucks. I know why we're doing it at the moment, because we don't have those other taller players to play in the forward line. So I get it for this year, but what is going to interest me next year is round 1, what that ruck looks like. I know a lot of people have gone off Cherry, and I think I haven't yet. I still am waiting to see what he looks like as the sort of 80% ruckman with, a Comben or a CCJ playing the other bit and playing in the forward line. But the rucks, it's just one of those things where when we've had Goldie doing it for the last 10 or so years, it's been such a reliable position, and I think now we're kind of learning what life is like for the other 50% of clubs that don't have a dominant ruckman. So, another soft effort from the rucks, I thought, today. And the final negative, I feel like I could go on forever. It's just been the theme this season. We faded a bit late. We failed to kick a goal in the last quarter. I think we kicked 5 points. The Tigers kicked some quick goals, and as I said, we weren't able to just really score after that. Just the usual stuff here. We're going to have to do some serious running in the preseason. Every team does plenty of running in the preseason. Every team comes back as fit as they've ever been. We know that, but it's going to have to be a focus for us, because our fade outs towards the end of games and our inability to win these close ones and just get ourselves in front has to be at least partially attributed to our fitness, because at the start of the games we do look a lot better than we do at the end. I think that's only natural, but our drop off seems to be more significant than our opposition, I would say. Let's turn our attention to what positives there were, because there were a couple. I alluded to it earlier, but Ziebell took a fantastic grab late in the first quarter, which was a nice little specky. Got a bit of airtime, didn't land on his feet, which always makes it look a bit better than it was. That was probably his shining moment. Not quite at the same as Cunner's moments last week, but still nice for him to, get a bit of airtime and take a fantastic mark. It did give the crowd an opportunity to get around him. He then stood up and, tried to hit a kick into the corridor and missed it, and the Tigers kicked a goal. And I just thought if that didn't sum up what his year has been like, I don't know what does. I mean, he did something fantastic and then immediately ruined it, but he was trying to do the right thing. He does a lot right, but just a little bit error prone, trying to make those things happen. So, yeah, I mean, I wasn't too upset by that. It's his last game. He's turned around 80 games and done. And yeah, I mean, that defense is going to be really interesting next week and then into next year. But next week, it's going to be missing Ziebell and Logue. McDonald got injured, seems to have a fairly significant hamstring during this game. So there's 3 of those senior players out of the defense, and we know that potentially Mackay's gone for next year. That defense is a real worry now. But yeah, sorry, we're focusing on the good. It was great that we're able to have Ziebell, take that, have his moment, his final game. He did take a mark forward late, but wasn't able to kick the goal. I think he was pretty lucky to even score a point from it. So much like Cotchin, he wasn't able to put one on the scoreboard for his final game, but was able to have his moment. I think just before I move on from this, I'm recording this Sunday sort of around midday, and there's been some reports this morning that Ziebell was king hit, sort of celebrating after the game. It sounds like maybe he was at a pub or something like that, and someone's just can't behind him and given him a whack and put him in hospital, which is just so disappointing that we live in a society where that kind of thing happens. This is a footy podcast, and it's, I don't really want to get stuck into social issues on this one, but I just think it's worth noting. I really hope that he's okay. It sounds like maybe he's going to have some facial surgery, which is absolutely not what you want to have to be doing the day after you've retired. So that my heart goes out to you, Zeebs, and I'm sorry. I'm just really sorry that kind of thing is still happening. It's a bit of a disgrace, to be honest. So, yeah, as I said, I don't want to spend too much time on that just because it's not the sort of thing that I really want to be, talking too much about, but hopefully Zeebs is okay. Let's get back into the positives. I thought our ball movement looked quite similar to last week. I was pretty impressed with it. I thought we were trying to use the corridor where possible. We were trying to move the ball fast, and it did work at times. When our skills were able to come off, I thought, we were able to give Larky and Curtis opportunities to get into the game. Those are players that rely on us to get the ball down to them fast. They've got the one-on-ones to compete, and they had that at times. That's why Larky was able to kick 6 goals, and a lot of that was Sheezel's drive. Goda was trying to do that. He had a couple of missed kicks, as he's often had this year, but he was trying his best. That's what Ziebell was trying to do when he went for that corridor kick. So I'm really enjoying this more attacking, aggressive style of play. You can see it doesn't always work because sometimes you're handballing it off of someone and they don't have an option, so they've just got to kick it long and hope. I'd prefer the kick long, hope quick, as opposed to the hold it up for 10 seconds and then kick it long. So I guess just to balance that out, like those forwards need those one-on-one opportunities like Larky and Curtis were provided with, and that's the sort of thing that Steve-O needs as well when he's in the side, and Cam Zurhaar. Thomas is one of those only players that can kind of create stuff out of nothing and out of the contest, and maybe even if he's outnumbered, he can do something. So that's how he was able to hit the scoreboard today. We've got to be able to tidy up those skills, and replace a few of those questionable kicks. The game style is going to look good, and I think it could potentially be an effective game style for us if we're able to develop those skills or just, replace some of these players that don't have the skills to play that game style. And I think that's what we're all kind of waiting and hoping for Clarko to do in this off-season is who are those players that can play his game style that he wants to try and craft, and who are those ones that he's just not going to be able to do it with. Another positive was Kane Turner, and I did not think I was going to be saying that. He really gave it to me today. I thought he was solid. It is, it's the classic expectations versus what he actually produced. And the stats sheet looks He had 11 touches, he had 3 tackles. But that did not do the pressure and the smothering and the game sense that he had today justice. I thought it was probably one of his better games for the year. He had an opportunity to kick a goal, but he gave it away to Curtis Taylor, who kicked it. He got involved in some handballing chains positively. His pressure was fantastic. And he stopped a couple of goals. He created a couple of goals. I thought that's the sort of pressure and also impact that we've needed to see from our small forwards. Now, if we had Kane Turner playing that role and we had a super dangerous like Paul Curtis type that was kicking, that was good for 2 or 3 every most weeks and looked dangerous all the time, I think it'd be a bit more palatable to have Kane Turner in the side. It's just that the issue has been we haven't had enough players who are capable of hitting the scoreboard. So I thought that Kane Turner did just enough offensively today and did a lot defensively that I think that's what was impressive about him. And he does have that real hardness. If he tackles you, you stay tackled. If he smothers it, it's not going anywhere. He doesn't get a fingertip on it. He gets his whole face on it. Probably out of all of the uncontracted players, I think he's probably done his chances the best of getting another 1-year deal in recent weeks. He's had a pretty solid month. I'd just love to think that the rest of the team can bring, his pressure and intensity more consistently, because it shouldn't be we're looking at him and going, jeepers, he's doing it. It should be he's doing it and everyone else is doing it too, and it just looks like a fantastic team effort. But I do have to give it to him. I've been on his back all year, like most North fans, and I'm sure for some of you this is probably an unpopular opinion. But I think, if a player plays out of his skin like I thought he did yesterday, I think you've got to acknowledge it. So, well done, Sugarcane. It was a good game for him for sure. Just another couple of little positives. I thought here's the classic setting the bar low, but it was a competitive game again. We were in it until 5 minutes into the last quarter, and if we take that Daniel Howe moment out, it's a different story, but, we can't do that. Anyway, we just need to play one more competitive game so that at the very least we can feel like we've stopped those consistent beltings that we've had over the past 2 years. I know that setting the bar low, I know that's not good enough, but if we're being honest with ourselves, that's just where we're at. It was a really frustrating game to watch because beyond our sort of 6 or so best players out there, I just really don't know who are going to be long-term players for this club. But I think all we can aspire to at the moment with this list and with our development is to be competitive and to give ourselves a chance in games. And we've done that over the past couple of weeks. So, we just need to do that one more time, I guess, for the year. And I think, playing the Gold Coast in Hobart gives us a chance to be competitive. I know that when we played Gold Coast earlier in the year, it was a really deflating game up on the Gold Coast, but I think we can hope for more. Last positive, I thought our scoring efficiency inside 50 was better than it's been for most of the year. We scored 57% of the time that went inside 50. And our average for the year has been 44%. So it was quite an efficient game for us. A lot of that was Larkey and Taron Thomas, obviously, hitting the scoreboard. We know that we're missing some crucial players in there, like Zerha and Steve-O, for example. So I think when Larkey has some support, it's good to know that the forwards are capable. if the ball's getting there fast. And I think that's the crucial thing was today we were able to move the ball fast and give Larkey and Paul Curtis those opportunities in the forward line. When we do that, I think we have a chance to be an efficient side. And again, if we've got a Combin or a CCJ in there providing another tall option, that'll make us even more dangerous. But it was good to see that, with that improved ball movement, it does give the forwards a better chance. So it's small steps forward. That's all we can look for at this really late stage of the season in what has been ultimately quite a disappointing season. Let's talk about any other news. To be honest, there hasn't been a heap. The VFL side is playing as I'm recording this, or they're about to play, so unfortunately I don't have anything to add on that other than it is their last match for the year, or last home and away match. I think they more or less have to win to get into finals, so we'll see. Hopefully they are able to play a final or two so that those, VFL players and those fringe players do get to play a bit more footy before the end of the year. So I guess we can see about that. And then, it's a bit irrelevant now, but we've just had, during the week, essentially we've put a fair few players in cotton wool. So Steve-O's gone for the season. Wardlaw, Zerha, CCJ, Combin have all been closed down for the year. They're not going to play for a variety of different reasons. And then obviously we've also had Cunnington, Ziebell and Hall all retire now. McDonald is going to be another to add to that list. So it's going to be interesting to see who actually pulls on the jumper for the last round. We don't have that many players left. But yeah, that's the significant news from the week, in that there wasn't a lot. In terms of the next week game against the Gold Coast, it is on Saturday again. We've got our third Saturday 1:45 p.m. game in a row down in Hobart. As I said before, we've just got to get through this game without a belting and just let this season of footy be over. Neither team has anything to play for except for pride, so it's just a case of can we break this losing streak and take some momentum into next season. At this point, I don't even know how excited I'd get about a win. It's it's hard to say. Obviously, a win's better than a loss, but it's all about the trade period and the draft now, I think. Maybe it's hard to know how Gold Coast will respond. They had a bit of a gut-wrenching loss to Carlton yesterday, had a massive chance. They got out to a big lead and then was a bit back and forth in the last quarter, but went down. Carlton are in really good form at the moment. So Gold Coast, to be competing with Carlton, were playing quite well. It'll be interesting to see if that deflates them for next week, or what kind of impact that has on them. The midfield look does scare me with Rowell and Anderson and Miller getting that service from Witts. I think given the midfield that we're going to be able to put out there, it does concern me, particularly if LDU can't come back in. It's that's the area of the ground that I think is a concern, and they do have some pretty good tall defenders as well, the Gold Coast. So Larkey might struggle to kick 6 or 7. The other thing to note is, it could be Ben Mackay's last game or a farewell game. Now, obviously, I don't expect there to be any fanfare about that. I just think it's worth noting that it could be the last time we see him in a North Melbourne jumper, and although it's going to be disappointing if and when he does leave, I think, it is important to recognise that he's been a fantastic player, and sure, he's played 70-odd games and he's played in hardly any wins, and he might be about to leave us, but I do look at it and go, can we blame him? Essendon got absolutely trounced yesterday by the Giants, so hopefully Mackay's looking at that and going, geez, is it any better over there? It is, just quietly, at least for the moment. But it could be Mackay's final game, and there's sure to be a few others that won't be getting another contract, and this might be the last of them. So just worth noting, I guess. I think always It's going to be interesting to see how long until those delistings are announced. Sometimes it's pretty soon after the final game. Sometimes it takes a couple of weeks, or they'll come in waves. Yeah, that's going to be interesting to watch. In terms of the team for next week, I mean, McDonald's going to be out. Ziebell's going to be out, having retired. I don't want to see Howe pull on the North Melbourne jumper again. I thought Perez, given he played the whole game, was super quiet. So I'd have those 4 out: McDonald, Ziebell, Howe, and Perez. I'm being a bit optimistic. I'm going to hope that Liam Shields is able to get back in for this game. He may not. So if he can't, maybe Perez holds his spot. So for ins, I'm hoping for something like Archer, Bergman, Shields, Lazaro. And as I say, if Shields isn't ready, maybe Perez can hold his spot. It'd be good to see Blake Drury get a full game. He wasn't fantastic coming on as a sub, but I think we've got to give him a chance to see what he's got before we potentially delist him. There's actually, as I mentioned before, there's just not a lot to choose from this week, given how many players we've wrapped the season up for or are out with long-term injuries. So beyond those ones that I've mentioned, I mean, Bonner, Dawson, Young, there's not a heap more else that can actually come in. Anyway, just worth noting, I guess. We'll see what happens. And ultimately, who cares at this point of the season? If you see some questionable choices, like it's the last game, sure, we want to win, but there's just so little to be gotten out of this last match. It's going to be, I think, probably a really tough game to get up for if you're a North player or a North fan. So I think that'll do it for the podcast. I'm going to be watching really closely. If you watched the footy on Saturday night, you would have seen the Adelaide Swans game where there was a really controversial goal umpiring decision late that essentially cost the Crows the game. It looked like Ben Keys had kicked the winning goal, and the goal umpire thought that it was hitting the post, or it hit the post, and it definitely didn't after some technology reviews. And Gil McLaughlin's come out today and categorically said that was a mistake, which, it's such a tough one for that goal umpire, but he did make a poor decision. It's going to be a fascinating watch now to see if that actually does cost the Crows a final spot. Because if they win next week and a few other things go their way, then anyway, it's just something to watch with a bit of interest, I think, because it's not often that we have such a clear cut that was an error. We're used to these mistakes or these things that come up in our game that are a bit grey, and this one just turns out to not be grey, and it could be that the Crows miss out on finals based on that. So anyway, just one to watch for next week with a bit of voyeurism, I guess. Yeah, that's all for the podcast. After that little diversion at the end. I hope everyone has a great week. It's the last time that we get to look forward to a North Melbourne loss for the year. So lap it up. Make sure you get all of those self-depreciating jokes out of the way. And this will be the last time that we have to worry about losing for a good 6 months or so. And I will talk to you at some point after the Gold Coast game. As always, go North. Thanks for listening to another episode of North Pod. Please subscribe to the podcast on your app and give me a rating or a review if you can. I'd really appreciate it. You can find me on all social media at NorthPod Show. That's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, Threads, you name it, I'm there. I'll see you next episode.